Okay. Well, a little background. I told you I went to Augustana College, graduated in 1971. I thought I was going to be a high school math teacher and football and basketball coach. That was, my idol was my uncle. He was 12 years older than I was. His folks had passed away very close together. My dad was the oldest in the family, came back from World War II, and his parents passed away, and now there's still a couple of kids to raise, and so my uncle was, like I consider him my older brother and the guy that I wanted to be like, and he was a high school math teacher and football and basketball coach. That's what I wanted to do. And had a pretty good career for a Division III guy. We had a chance to play professional football in Cincinnati. And I remember the Bengals drafted me. In those days, the draft was in January. And I'm talking to my uncle, and I said, geez, Uncle Gary, I don't know if I should do this. And because I had a job at New Trier High School in Chicago. It's one of the nicer areas on the north side of Chicago, the highest paying school district in Illinois for teachers. And I had a job there in the math department coaching football and basketball with him. And I said, what chance does a kid from Augustana have in the NFL? If I go there, I got to turn this job down. I'm not going to get it back. And he says, you're always, you better do this. He says, you're always going to wonder, could you have made it? And he said, besides, there'll be a teaching job there next year. And in fact, my first contract was really unique. I didn't have an agent. Not many people had agents in those days. And so I came to town, and I went out to dinner with Mike Brown, who was the general manager at that time. Paul Brown ran the team, his dad, and Bill Walsh, who was my quarterback, going to be my quarterback coach. And we went out to dinner, and then Mike took me back to the stadium at 10 o'clock to negotiate my contract. So we're sitting in his office, and he said, Kenny, we're going to offer you a 3-year contract for $18,000, $20,000, and $22,000, and a $7,500 signing bonus. And so I'm sitting there thinking, well, I'm okay with the $18,000 because the teaching job was $5,000. So I said, I'm 13 ahead there. But for some reason, I blurted out, I want a $10,000 signing bonus. Well, he pulled a check out of his pocket, already made out to me for $7,500, and said, this is all you're going to get. And I said, fine, where do I sign? It took 10 minutes to do my contract. So that's kind of how I got, started into football. And so when I went to my first training camp in Wilmington, Ohio, and it was, I said, wow, geez, kind of didn't know a lot of people, and here's this small college kid coming in there. And then I look around, and we start practicing. We only had 2 quarterbacks in camp. I said, I like my chances to make the team. I'm one of 2, and they're only going to keep 2. So Virgil Carter was our starter my rookie year. I backed him up. And then the next year, I won the starting job. So in 1972, I became the starting quarterback. And that's when I was making the big money. Before training camp was over and I had won the job, Mike Brown called me in. He says, Kenny, you're now a starting quarterback in the NFL. We're going to rip up your contract, give you a new one. So instead of making $20,000 my second year, I made $25,000. So that was the big bucks. And to show you how things had changed over the years, Boomer Esiason was the guy that replaced me. And my last year was 1986, and I think it was Boomer's second or third. Boomer made more money in 1986 in 1 year than I did in 16 years total. So things had changed a little bit. But I don't know if I was reading USA Today, and kind of in the left-hand column on the sports page, numbers to know. And one of the things that kind of stood out to me today, I think it was 15.7 was the number. And I kind of rounded off to 16% of NFL players today file bankruptcy within 12 years of retirement. We didn't really have the problem back when I played because nobody made any money, and when the season ended, everybody got a job. In those days, we only played 14 games. We had 6 preseason games. There wasn't the rules on training camp. Now you can't go in until 14 days before your first preseason game. So they don't go into the beginning of August. My first training camp, I reported to Wilmington, Ohio, July 7th. September 15th, I was still in training camp. So we were literally there 9 weeks. But we had no off-season program. We're working. So that was our off-season program. Became before we started the season. So we were in camp for a month. We played 6 preseason games, and the season opened up rather than the beginning of September, the last of September. So kind of a little bit different culture, but it was a great background for me. My first off season, I was spent at Fort Polk, Louisiana. It was in the Vietnam War era, and I had a very low lottery number, so I was going to get drafted, and I joined the Army Reserve, and so I spent my first year down there being trained, the home of the infantrymen, and so I was in a National Army Reserve unit in Cincinnati for 6 years while I started my career. The next year I went back to Augustana to finish up. Got my teaching certificate, and then the third year, so my first year out, I got a real estate license. And really enjoyed, I'd met some friends that had a real estate company in Cincinnati. One of them still a big one over here, Jim Huff Realty. He had worked for guys, it was Bob Daniels at that time. They hired me, and I got my real estate license, and I remember going to the real estate class down in Louisville, and I forget the guy that ran the class to get your license, and the end result was that he wanted me to teach the math part of it for his class from then on, because I was pretty good in math. So I got a real estate license, and did that for a little bit. In the early days of northern Kentucky, there wasn't a lot of commercial and industrial real estate going on. Obviously now it's booming with all the industrial parks that are going on. I really would have liked that. I got tired of showing women houses that couldn't make up their mind if they wanted a white house or red house, 3 bedrooms, 4. That wasn't me, and so I kind of got out of real estate, and then I went to law school. And in fact, I went to Chase Law School when Chase was over in Fort Wright up on the hill. And the reason I went to Chase is that they kind of accepted me as a special student. That when you play football, my first off season is in the spring. And of course, all the rotation of classes start in the fall. So they accepted me as a special student. And that first spring, they let me take 3 individual classes just from the instructor, which were fall classes that got me into the rotation. So from then on, I would go to school in the off season. During the season, I would take 1 class on a Monday night, and during the summer, I was full-time day student, full-time night student before training camp. So it took me 5 off seasons to graduate from law school, which would have been actually a little bit less than 3 years. I used to hate those Monday night classes because some of the times I may not have been totally prepared for that. And one of the things I really liked about Chase, at least at that time, they had a lot of practicing attorneys teaching classes. And the one class I had, the attorney happened to be a neighbor of mine and knew that I had been on a road trip and didn't get back until early, Monday morning. And of course, then if I hadn't played well, then he'd always kind of grill me before the class about, what was wrong with me. But, it was a great experience going to law school. And I think one of the reasons I really enjoyed it is, I think there is something to say about the dumb jock syndrome, that you play and your mind gets so focused on playing football that your mind isn't stimulated with other things. And going to law school kind of got me stimulated in thinking about other things. And so the grand plan was I was going to work for a law firm in Cincinnati. It was Strauss, Troy, and Ruhlman. Now I think it's just Strauss and Troy. It was still a big firm, and they've got offices in northern Kentucky, and I was going to be a sports agent. And so I was certified by the NFLPA to be an agent, and I was going to do it the right way. That, all my contacts go through the coach at the proper time, and, we're going to be above board and everything. And, I get the guys, they could do the financial planning, do the contracts. Kind of what I found out, that if you do it the right way, you had no chance to get anybody, because all these guys, by after the freshman year, if they were any good, already had their contacts. So at that same time, I had started a beer distributorship in northern Kentucky, and started off very small, but we were the first Coors distributorship east of the Mississippi. And so started that, jumped over, and we had the Dayton market as well. And then at that point in time, I decided selling beer was a lot more fun than practicing law, so I went into that aspect of it. But which, and I was, a 30% owner in both of the companies, but, so I was into sales, and I was kind of the guy that, went in and tried to get us, shelf space and marketplace. I would do Coors Light nights on Monday nights. We'd pick a local bar, and I'd bring players there. So we kind of had an unfair advantage a little bit there. And then so did that. And then I guess my next business venture was in northern Kentucky that a group of friends of mine, a lot wealthier than I was, said, Kenny, we're going to buy this group of 7 savings and loans. And we want you to be on the board of directors, but we want the board to buy, each board member to buy 5% of the stock. And I'll never forget this because the price was $460,000. And I didn't come close to having that much money. And the smartest guy on our team was a guy named Steve Kreider, who was a wide receiver. He's still a big financial guy in New York now. So I said, Steve, look at this prospectus. What do you think? He comes back a day later and says, how do I get in? And I said, that was good enough for me. So I borrowed the money to do this, and I'm scared shitless. Well, but it was really an interesting process because we took those 7 savings and loans. We took it public with an IPO, so I went through that process. I'm sitting on the board and going through the loan committee meetings, which a lot easier to borrow money then than it was now. And then we actually sold out to PNC. So I got my money back in that deal plus a little bit. So I've had kind of although I was a football player, kind of a varying degree of experiences. And then when you retire, what are you going to do? Well, I always wanted to coach. So I'm going to look for a coaching job. And these people say, Kenny, what are you doing that? Do you know how many hours a coach works? I said, you're stupid. You're never home. You don't see your family. It's just stupid to want to go into coaching. So I said, I didn't want to be stupid. So I started working for KRC radio and television station. So my first job there is I did a morning show with Jerry Thomas, who was the morning DJ over there. So I got to work at 3 o'clock in the morning. My first sports report was at 5. Then I'd walk across the street or walk across the hallway. I'd work for TV till 7 o'clock. I'd go home, have dinner, and go to bed so I could get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to go to work. And I said, this is not any worse than coaching. And I did that for 6 years. And realized, I was always kind of a guy that if I worked hard, I wanted to show improvement, financially, status-wise. And I realized, I'm not really good at this broadcasting stuff. And so I decided to go into coaching. My one broadcast story is the last year I'm there, they made me the sports anchor at Channel 12. And I really didn't want to do it. But the CEO of the company had me out on the golf course and said, Kenny, I really want you to do this, and how do you say no to him? And so I was we started in August. And I think it's on Showtime now. Some of the guys may see it, that football show that Collinsworth, Phil Simms, those guys are on. It started on HBO with Lenny Dawson and Nick Bonacani. And they called and they wanted me to do that show. And the news director wouldn't let me off for 2 nights a week during the football season to go do that show because I was just starting as the sports anchor and they needed me there all the time. So who did they call for the job? Chris Collinsworth, which he did that, which turned into Monday Night Football. Now he's the highest paid announcer on TV and he's making $5 million a year. It could have been me. But so then I went into coaching, and which I really enjoyed. And that's how I met, Jenny when, her dad came with Forrest Gregg in 1980 as the offensive line coach, and she was one of these little snot-nosed kids running around all the time, getting everybody's way. But so I ended up coaching in Cincinnati for 10 years. I coached in Jacksonville. When I got fired in Cincinnati, when Marvin Lewis came, I went to Jacksonville for 4 years. Jack Del Rio was the head coach. In 6 years, he fired 19 assistant coaches. I last 4 years, which was great because then I went to Pittsburgh. Ended up winning a Super Bowl with the Steelers in 2009. So I've got the gaudiest Super Bowl ring you've ever seen since they were the first team to win 6. although I am smart enough that I never bring that when I come to Cincinnati. It's not a good thing to have. Jump in anytime you want here, Jenny, if I'm going in a wrong direction.
Have you any questions about this playing career or those years? What was the toughest stretch there when you were playing, would you say?
Well, the toughest stretch for me was like 1978, 1979. I'd had a lot of success early, and my second year as a starter, my third year in the league, we go to the playoffs. I lead the league in passing. I go to a Pro Bowl. The next year, we're good. 1975, I lead the league in passing again. I go to the Pro Bowl. I go to the Pro Bowl in 1976. Then I broke my hand and missed a little bit. The head coach got fired, and 78 and 79 were the worst teams I'd ever played on. And had to have a friend of mine was a Cincinnati police officer I'd roomed with my rookie year. I mean, literally had to have him sit with my family in the stands. It was so ugly. And I hurt my knee, and I'm laying on the field, and you're getting cheered with that. So that was a tough time, but it did lead to one of my great stories. This is something that was the worst team I'd ever played on. And so we're playing in Pittsburgh, and it's late in the year, and we're getting our ass kicked. And Joe Green, their Hall of Fame defensive tackle, sacks me again. He's laying on top of me, and he says, "Kenny," he says, "why don't you come in the locker room for a beer after the game?" And I said, "That sounds like a good deal to me." So at the old stadium in Pittsburgh, the locker rooms were next to each other, so I showered quickly, and I walked into the locker room. The first locker I came to was Terry Bradshaw, who was their quarterback, and he's doing his media obligations. He sees me, he tells the media I'll be back, takes me to the back of the locker room. They turned off their sauna, they got a garbage can full of beer. So he clears off a couple seats, I have 2 or 3 beers, I'm feeling better about life. I go out to get the buses to go to the airport. They've gone. I said, how am I going to explain to my wife I got fined and had to buy a plane ticket from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati because I'm in the Steelers locker room drinking beer after the game? So I'm looking for a cab to go to the airport, and there's the equipment truck. And so I've got my bag, and I'm running down the street, and our equipment guy was Tom Gray, and he sees me, and so I ride the equipment truck out to the airport. And for some reason, the plane is late, and security was not as intense in those days, so the equipment truck literally could go up to the gate that the plane's going to come in, and a security guy lets me in, and of course, everybody's standing around. And I said, I wasn't having a great year, and the team was awful. And, at first I walk in, I see him, and I'm really pissed. I said, the starting quarterback's not there, and they don't know? Then I started thinking maybe they knew, and they just didn't care. So, but it was a little bit different, in those days.
Who were some of the most talented players you feel like you played with?
Well, the best player, I know he's been here, Anthony Munoz, Hall of Fame, the best offensive lineman I think that's ever played the game. I think the second best guy is a wide receiver named Isaac Curtis. Tremendous wide receiver. I always say, a lot of you remember Jerry Rice in the days with Joe Montana in San Francisco, and Jerry came in, had a tremendous impact on the league. And I said, Isaac had that same impact when he came in 1973, but you didn't throw the ball as much. So, he would have 10 touchdown catches a year, which would lead the league, and he averaged about 20 yards a reception. Fantastic numbers. Well, now today they throw the ball so much that, if you don't have 20 touchdowns, and, it's just a kind of a different game, but he was a great player, and, I tend to gravitate to offensive linemen, Max Montoya, along with Anthony, Dave Lapham, who still does the Bengals. He was my roommate for a bunch of years, and a little story about Jenny's dad was our offensive line coach, and this was Forrest. I was always a nervous guy before the games anyway. And so we're getting ready for our first game, and we have our pregame or our meeting the night before in the hotel, and then the head coach has the quarterbacks go up to his suite with the whole offensive staff, and the quarterbacks don't get to say anything. But he goes around to the staff to talk about what's going on, and he gets, Jimmy, what do you think about pass protection tomorrow? Well, coach, man to man, I think we're okay, but they got the TE, they got the ET. I don't know if we can pick up any stunts. And I'm starting to sweat. The offensive line coach doesn't know if we can block a stunt tomorrow in pass. I said, why am I here? But it all turned out pretty good.
There's a lot of
It would be great if it happened. I was disappointed the first year that I was eligible. I got down to the final 15. And, when you're down to the final 15, they say, all right, at 3 o'clock this afternoon, be around a phone. And I remember sitting there by the phone, it doesn't ring, and that bothered me. And then from then on, it really didn't. And, a couple years ago, a guy that's become a friend, a real estate guy in Cincinnati, David Kubicki, kind of had this push to get me in the Hall of Fame. Did a lot of stuff, sent out some great information to Hall of Fame voters. And, now I'm on, I got to come in from the seniors end of it, and they pick one a year, a committee. And from what I understand, I'm on their radar, but they think that there is a backlog of defensive players that need to go in before they go back to offensive players. So my feeling is, if you don't do it now when I can enjoy it, what do I care? So, although when I say what do I care, hopefully I do well for a long time. That one of the things that has been in the news recently, is 4,000 NFL players filed a suit against the NFL for hiding concussion, concussion-related issues. I did not join that lawsuit. I think there are guys in the league that have Alzheimer's, that have dementia, that need help because of the way that they played football. I did not. I think I'm doing okay. My wife disagrees with me at times, but I think I'm doing okay. So I did not. I thought there were too many players joined that lawsuit looking for a paycheck at the end, and I didn't think that was right. So.
How many concussions did you have over the years?
In those days, a lot. In those days, they weren't called concussions. You got your